Now let's just do a summary of everything we've done so far. I'm using a handout that's posted in our Canvas course. It's called Dealing with Fractions and Mixed Numbers. So if you have a way of printing that, and you'd like to print that and follow along, that'd be great. Okay. One of the first things we learned how to do was how to simplify fractions. So that involves finding a number that we know will divide evenly into both the top and the bottom number. You can use your multiplication chart to help you with this. What you'd be doing is looking for a number that, like if you were looking for a number at the top, like let me just give you an example. So for instance, 3. If you looked at 3 at the top of the multiplication chart and you ran down that list, you would see a 3, then a 6, then a 9, and then you'd hit a 12, and if you continued, you'd hit an 18. Okay? When you see that happen, that means 3 is a common factor to both 12 and 18. Now, you can use this idea, and you can use it to try to minimize how many times you have to divide by a number by not just looking for where you see 12 and 18 under a column, but look for the largest number that has both 12 and 18. So what you can do is start more to the right and look like at 10, you don't see 12 and 18. Keep going towards the left. I see 18 when I look under 9, but I don't see 12. 8, I don't see either. And keep going until you see 6. And then notice that 6 hits 12, and then it hits 18. So both 12 and 18 are under the 6 column. So if you want to, you can start at the right of the multiplication chart, look through the columns looking for a 12, and then see if you also have an 18. And the first column you'll find where that happens would be this one, which tells you that 6 goes into both of those evenly, and that it's the largest number that goes into both of those. And so you'll be through in one step. Okay? The thing is, it really doesn't matter if you find the largest. So a lot of times when I'm doing one, if I notice that 12 and 18 are both divisible by 2, I might go ahead and just divide by 2 top and bottom. Half of 12, half of 18. Then I look at the smaller number 6 and 9 and notice 3 would go into both. So now I'm going to divide by 3, and I'm going to come up with the 2/3. Okay? So you don't really have to get the greatest common factor. You can actually divide by anything. The first thing you know goes into both of them. Okay? Now with 15 and 75, I noticed that 5 goes into both. If I need help with the division I'm trying to do, like I'm going to try to do 15 divided by 5 and 75 divided by 5. If I need help with that, I could use my multiplication chart. Okay? What you would do is you would look at the 5 column until you hit 15, right? So you'd find that. You'd look over here and you would see a 3. Okay? So 15 divided by 5 is 3. And then you would do the same for 75. You would keep going under the 5 column, and you'd find out that 5 goes into 75 15 times. Now, at that point, you have to then look at 3 and 15, and you might and see if there's anything else that goes into those two numbers. Both of those are divisible by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 15 divided by 3 is 1/5. So typically, what you do is just look for a number that you know goes into those numbers evenly, divide by that, top and bottom. These have to be the same, right? What you're dividing by has to be the same, top and bottom. And then once you've done that, okay, make sure before you put in your final answer that you've checked to see if there's anything else that would go into both numbers evenly. Okay. All right, another thing we did, sometimes we have to put in answers in a certain form, or like if we were multiplying or dividing mixed numbers, we'd have to change them into improper fractions. So we spent a little time going back and forth between those. So if I start with a mixed number like 3 1/4 and I want the improper fraction, The idea is to take the 3 whole, you're going to be breaking them into 4 parts. There was already 1/4, and so that gives you 13, and they're going to stay fourths. Make sure that the denominator here and the denominator here are the same. So your answer would be 13/4. And then if you start with an improper fraction and you want to know what it would be as a mixed number, you take 42 and you divide it by 5. So you could use your multiplication chart and see that if you go down the 5 column, 5 times 8 would be 40. Okay, and so 5 would go into 42 8 whole times, and then there'd be 2 left. So your answer would be, you kind of go this way with it. It would be 8 and 2/5. Make sure those denominators match. That helps sometimes getting things in the right spot. Okay. All right, now here we're looking at adding, subtracting, and then multiplying and then dividing. Okay. So with adding, subtracting fractions, really important asterisk, you need common denominators. Before you wind up adding or subtracting, right? Got to get common denominators. So on the first problem, this is 7/12, this is 11/12. They're already the same type of thing that you're adding. So you're just going to be able to say 7 plus 11, which is 18, and it'll be 12ths. But then don't forget, if you wind up getting something like this to happen, where 18 and 12 have a common factor, I'm going to move that over a little bit. If you notice, after you do that, your fraction has to be fully simplified. So there you might notice those are both divisible by 2, okay, which would give me a 9/6, but then that's both divisible by 3. So finally I get to 3/2. Now you might have noticed 18 and 12 are both divisible by 6, so you might have been able to simplify in just one step. Okay? And then whether they want the answer as 3/2 or 1.5, just watch what they say. Typically, if it starts as a fraction, they just want it as a fraction at the end. All right, now the next 2 problems, they do not have common denominators. So we're trying to add 3/4 to 1/3, and those aren't the same size pieces. So we can't just add them and say that's 4 something. It's not 4/7 or anything like that. So what we have to do is get those, let me blow this up a little bit. Should have done that earlier. Get those fractions rewritten so they have a common denominator. So you look at the 4 and the 3, and the least common multiple of 4 and 3 would be 12. That's the smallest number that both 4 and 3 would go into evenly. You can find that by looking at the 4 column and the 3 column and noticing the 12. But you know, if you're ever struggling finding the least common multiple, you can just get a common multiple. You can always get a common multiple by just multiplying those denominators. It may not be the smallest, but it will always work. So what I'm going to do is rewrite those fractions. I like to do it below the fraction. So I want both of those denominators to be a 12. So when I'm looking at that, do you notice that the 4 would have had to have been multiplied by 3 to make 12? So I need to multiply the numerator by 3 as well. See, now what I'm doing is changing 3/4 to a new name, 9/12. I need the 12ths. So I can't change the size of that original 3/4. Like if I were to shade 3/4 and shade 9/12, it'd be the same quantity. You're just rewriting 3/4 momentarily so it has a denominator of 12. All right, same thing here. 3 times 4 would give me 12, so the new numerator would need to be a 4. This is the step people have the hardest time with. It's getting that, they can get the least common multiple pretty quickly, but getting that new numerator. Okay? So now 9/12, if you listen to it, 9/12 and 4/12, we're adding apples and apples. Both of them are 12ths. So we can do that. We'd get 13, and they'd be 12ths. Okay? And that's fully simplified because nothing goes into 13 and 12 evenly. But again, on both of these problems, if they wanted the mixed number form, you could get it. And just watch that extra little writing they sometimes put on the problems that say whether they want it as a mixed number. If they said that, you would change it to these, right? And if they said they want it as a fraction, you would leave it 13/12 or 3/2, okay? Now, with subtraction, same thing. You need common denominators. Now, you could just take 8 times 4, those denominators, and use 32. It's not the least common multiple, though. You could use 16, because 8 goes into 16, and so does 4. If you wanted the least common multiple, though, that would be 8. And that way, I wouldn't have to change the first fraction at all. Saves me a little time. And then that second fraction, the 4 would need to be multiplied by 2 to make an 8. So I'm going to multiply by 2 on top to get 2. And I'm subtracting. So 5 eighths, take away 2 of those 8s, I'd be left with 3 8s, and that's fully simplified. Okay. All right, so let's go to the multiplying next. With multiplying, no common denominators needed. Do not get common denominators. Okay. Just multiply. Straight across. Okay. And then I'm going to recommend you simplify before doing that. Learn to simplify first. Okay? So like on this one, 3 times 1 over 4 times 2. When I look at that, there's nothing common between the numerator and the denominator. No number goes into the numerator that would also go into any of the numbers in the denominator. So 3 8s and I'm done. And really you wouldn't write that middle step, you would just do it. Okay? Now for this one, I could do 8 times 10 is 80, and then do 15 times 12 and get 180. But then I'm going to have to do some simplifying. For instance, I know both of these are divisible by 10. And then 8 is divisible by 2. So is 18. And so I'd finally get 4/9. So I can do that. That works okay. But if I would look a little more while the numbers are smaller, like here, and simplify first, what I might have noticed is that 5 would go into 10 twice, and 5 would go into 15 3 times. The hard part is I write down the result of what I'm thinking, so you have to hear what I did. I took 10, I divided by 5, and 15, I divided by 5. Okay? All right, then what I might notice is that 8, I could divide by 2 to get 4, but I'd have to divide, well, let me go ahead and divide by 4, actually. I could divide 8 by 4 and get 2, and divide 12 by 4 and get 3. You normally don't show, because it makes it kind of messy, you don't show the divided by 4, you don't show this part right here. You just do the result of it. So then you see a 2 times 2, which would be 4 on top, and then 3 times 3 left, which would be 9 on the bottom. Okay? So that's simplifying first. So let me do that again. Let me show you how quick it is for real. Let me just do the part where you simplify first so you don't get such big numbers. It's hard to get that erased. All right, so if you were really doing it, what you typically do is just do, well, I can see that 5 would go into 10 twice and 15 3 times. 4 goes into 8 twice, goes into 12 3 times, and then you do 2 times 2, 3 times 3, and you're done. Okay, those are the two ways of doing it. All right, 22 times 1/4, what I'm going to think is that's really 22 over 1 times 1 over 4. Okay, And I could go ahead and multiply here. It's about the same, either way I think about it. But then I'd have to notice that both are divisible by 2. So I wind up with 11 on top, 2 on the bottom. And they might want it as a fraction. If they want it as a mixed number, then I would divide 2 into 11. Goes 5 with a remainder of 1. Okay? They'd probably want it as a fraction, but sometimes they ask for mixed numbers. All right, now dividing, don't forget the algorithm involves changing it to multiplication first. Keep, change to multiplication, flip the second fraction. So keep, change, flip. Now it's multiplication. Now I'm going to look for that common factor. I noticed that 2 goes into 2 once, goes into 8 4 times. So my answer would be 3/4. Okay? Keep, change, flip. Okay? Then notice that in the denominator, everything's just divisible by 5s. In the numerator, I can't divide by 5, so I would just multiply straight across and get 36 on top, and then 125 on the bottom. And I wouldn't waste time trying to simplify because I can tell from here that there are no common factors top and bottom. So this would be my final answer. Okay? If you have a whole number, you still have to keep, change. Problem is when you're flipping, the 15 currently is really the same as 15 over 1. So when you flip that, it's 1 over 15. All right, now you could multiply straight across and then simplify, but we're trying to learn to recognize this. 5 would go into 15 3 times. 5 goes into 5 once, goes into 15 3 times. Remember, when you're doing this, you're dividing something in the numerator and something in a denominator. Like 6 and 3, I'm not going to divide anything out of those because they're both in the denominator. So this turns out to be 1 on top, 6 times 3 is 18 on the bottom, and that would be my final answer. Okay? Now, in my opinion, or what I really want you to notice, is that simplifying, right, multiplying, and dividing all kind of feel the same. Basically, once you've got it changed into multiplication, then you're really starting to try to look for common factors and simplify. So there's a lot of commonality between simplifying, multiplying, and dividing. It's adding and subtracting that requires the most work. Please, please, please make sure you understand that you need common denominators before you can add fractions. They have to be like fractions. Okay? And then once you do, okay, sorry, some stuff got moved around when I was moving it. I'm going to get that looking better for a moment because I'm going to save this. And then once you do get those common denominators, that's when you can add or subtract them. Okay? See, 5/8 take away 1/4. Those aren't the same size pieces. You have to wait until you get them to have common denominators. Okay, let me move this down because I'm going to save this and post it in a little bit. Let me move this down here. Okay, all right, now just a comment on mixed numbers. So my recommendation, so that you don't have to worry about carrying and borrowing when you're adding or subtracting, is just to change your mixed number problems. Change to improper fractions first. Then you do things the way we learned earlier on the sheet. So 1 3/8, that's 1 times 8, 1 times 8 plus 3. That would be 11/8. 2 1/2 would be 2 times 2 wholes cut into 2 pieces plus 1 would be 5 halves. Do that first. Then from there, do whatever's necessary. We're adding, so we need common denominators. So I could use 8. So the first fraction would not have to be adjusted at all. But the second fraction, I would have to change that denominator into 8s. So I'm going to multiply by 4 top and bottom. All right, then that's going to turn out to equal 11 plus 20 would be 31 over 8. Nothing goes into both 31 and 8 evenly. That's an improper fraction. Because this started as a mixed number, chances are they're going to want it as a mixed number. So take a moment to change it by dividing 8 into 31. Okay, so it almost goes 4 times, but not quite. So it goes 3 whole times. And then when you subtract 24 from 31, you get 7 left. So this would be the same as 3 wholes and 7/8. So 3 and 7/8 would be your answer. And I'm changing it to a mixed number since these started with a mixed number. Okay. Now the second one, those have common denominators already, so you might be tempted to just do subtraction. But this is not going to be just 3 minus 1 and then 1/5 take away 3/5. Since 1/5 is smaller than 3/5, you're not going to be able to do that and get 2/5. That would not be correct. Okay, you would have to do some borrowing. Okay, and you could, but I'm telling you, people typically mess it up. You could do this one by borrowing 1 from the 3. And then when you add 1 to 1/5, since this is a fifth, when you add 1 to it, you're going to be adding 5/5 to that. So you could do it by borrowing 1 from the 3, so you'd only have a 2 there. When you add 5/5 to 1/5, you'd get 6/5. Then you could subtract 1 and 3/5 by thinking, well, 3/5 from 6/5 would leave me 3/5, and 1 from 2 would be 1. So it seems like it's nice, but that's only if this makes sense. And that's a pretty sophisticated topic that most people don't make sense of. Okay? All right, now, another way to do it is to just rewrite 3 and 1/5. So 3 times 5 plus 1 would be 16/5. Then 1 times 5 is 5 plus 3 is 8. So that would be 16/5 minus 8/5. They are like fractions, so we don't have to do the common denominators like we did in the previous problem. So then I would get 8/5. And then the disadvantage of this approach is since it started with a mixed number, they'd probably want it that way. So I'd have to do 5 goes into 8 one time, 3 left over. So I know that's equal to 1 and 3/5. And they'd probably want that as the final answer. Okay? So feel free to try to make sense of the borrowing idea. If that makes sense, you can use it. But typically with mixed numbers, anytime you see them, just change them to improper fractions and then do what you've learned to do for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing fractions. All right, now for this problem, it's a division. This one you have to change it to an improper fraction. So that would be 8 plus 3. That would be 11/4. This would be 10/3. Okay? Let me do that here. That would be 11/4 divided by 10/3. Don't need common denominators because we're multiplying and dividing stuff. So here what you should be thinking is keep, change, flip. Okay? Then you should be looking. 3 doesn't go into anything in the denominator. 11 doesn't go to anything in the denominator. So I can't simplify first. I'm just going to multiply straight across and get 33 over 40. And that happens to not be a mixed number and can't be written as a mixed number. It's smaller on top. So my final answer would be 33/40.